Thank you. I just want to also agree with what Sintimbila said in terms of, because I served as a junior lecturer at Tux for 1 year as part of my CA articles, and they have a program for CAs for African students called Tutuka, where they focus on them. Sorry, and I must say, like those students, like the one thing, like I know as a lecturer or past lecturer, is that the resources that you give available to students to help them pass and what they actually use is like there's a great gulf between the two. But I must say, like the Tutuka students, the ones who were the most hungry, who came from the most, like they came from backgrounds which you can't, like, or I can't identify with. They were the ones who were permanently in my office. They're the ones who would permanently make use of the tutor classes and what was available for them because of the fact that they wanted this more, whereas a lot of people, especially people I went to school with, were more than okay to do their 3-year degree in 5 years and not complete their honors simply because of the fact that to them, that's not a problem. It's expected that their parents will fund them to go to university, whereas other people, they have so grateful for this that they take it with both hands. And like I agree with you in terms of the potential that gets wasted.
Thank you. Okay, we'll come to you. Okay, one at the back, and then I'll come to you in the front of the good resource.
Good afternoon. My name is Letlogonol. Firstly, thank you for, I guess, this wonderful discussion. The question I thought was particularly challenging because I didn't believe we can have anything anti-racist. Primarily because I think that the system of white supremacy, right, at its root is that for black people and people of color in this country to be at the same playing field as white people, they need to stand still for the next 350 years. And then we can start about equal opportunity and talk about non-racialism. So I think that it's important discussions to have, but we shouldn't be too saddled with trying to find like this outcome-based thing, but we should really have like honest conversations about one. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission did not work for people of color in this country. We're still existing in a neo-apartheid system. So until we deal with the effects and the roots, like some of the speakers have said about white supremacy, about patriarchy, and about cis-normativity and heteronormativity, we can't move forward to anything anti because we haven't dealt with the definitions that we are existing in. Thanks.
Thank you. Can we get a mic here to the front, please? Please don't be shy. If you're wearing school uniform, I'll come to you immediately if you want to speak. Advocate Bezos, and then I'll come to you, Sissy, and then I want some of the young people to speak as well.
If you don't mind, I want to stand up. I have a stick. The speakers brought to my mind that I am a refugee from Nazi Germany, occupation of Greece, with a father who had been elected a mayor, but the dictator was took over Greece in 1936, and all elected people were written off, and my father was given an option. You either give up your mayorship or you go to jail. Greece fell to Germany in April 1941, and 7 New Zealand soldiers that had come to resist Greece were hiding in the bush. My father took the initiative of bluffing the Germans about why a little boat had to leave the harbor. We set off for Crete. We didn't get there. Fortunately, the British Navy picked us up and told us that they're going to take us to Egypt. I was put in an orphanage for Greeks only in Alexandria. And after 3 months, Egypt was in danger of falling to Rommel and the Italians in North Africa. And my father, together with 145 other refugees, was given an option to either go to India or South Africa. My father chose South Africa. When I was asked why, he said that he heard that in South Africa you can pick up gold and diamonds on the pavements. And he thought that that was a good choice. I'm sorry that I'm giving you this sort of personal, because Egypt was likely to fall to Rommel. They said they must get out. And this was it. We came in grand style on the Ile-de-France, 145 refugees. And we arrived in Durban. The first thing that struck me as a 14-year-old was the rickshaw boys at the harbor. No shoes, short trousers, pulling weighty rickshaws from one ship to the other, sweating. Didn't make a good impression on me as a 14-year-old. We got onto the train, all of us, and we were brought to Johannesburg, put in a hotel. I had nothing to do near the station, and I said, why did we get off here near the station, which I visited, watching trains come and go? I was told that there was a demonstration at the entrance of the Johannesburg station. In Afrikaans, translated for me into English, that the British were bringing the veilgoed of Europe to South Africa. I didn't go to school for 4 years because I couldn't speak English, despite attempts to get me there. And the Sunday Times published the story that I have told you a bit about, and had my father's and my picture in the Sunday Times. I was working in a shop because I was refused by no less than 3 or 4 schools because I couldn't speak English. And in walked a woman into the shop. I served her. She told me, she asked me, are you the boy whose picture was in the paper? Yes. What school do you go to? I don't go to school. What? She shouted. I'm a teacher at Baldwin Junior High. Monday morning I'm going to pick you up. She told the boss to make sure that I wear my best and buy a uniform as soon as possible. She was my teacher for 2 years. She got engaged to be married. And she said to me that I have arranged with Athlone High, Miss Greenberg, for you to go to that school. The Afrikaans teacher said to me in grade 8, Pisos, you look quite well fed to me. Yes, sir, my father works and pays for the food I eat. And I hope that one day I will make some contribution for the food that I have eaten. We don't only feed you, we have made you clever. A boy of 16, I was then nearing 19, sitting next to me, got up and said, "Sir, if you don't apologize to Bezos, I'm getting up, I'm going to the headmaster's office and I'm telling him what you did, what you said, and what you threatened." Sorry, man, you can't take a joke. Nobody laughed. I tell that story because when I was in grade 9, Meneer Combring, another Afrikaner, said, "Bezos, I hear from Ms. Greenberg that you are ambitious to go to the university. You can't get in unless you get at least an E in Afrikaans. I am at your pleasure. My office door is open." He gave me a copy of Patrice Heller. I don't know whether, well, we have an Afrikaans academic, and she will explain how popular Patrice Heller was in the 40s in the Afrikaans language. But he's good with his word. He gave me an English Afrikaans dictionary. And I did get an E in Afrikaans. And did go to Wits University. I quote an English judge that generalizations are the product of vulgar minds. And I add, you see, there was a grade 8 teacher and a grade 9 teacher, both Afrikaners. You can't generalize. We are all human beings. I can tell you much more, but I think I have told you enough for us. Not to say he is black or he's white, or she is this or the other. We are all human beings. Let us behave. And finally, the professor of Roman Dutch law said in the first year, only 1 out of the 3 of you will make final. And if you are a woman, there were 3 in the class. You won't make it at all. he was proved right. 2 of them didn't pass. And the third one gave it up because of the manner she was treated as a woman in the law faculty, which made it impossible for Nelson Mandela to become an advocate. The best they could suggest is for him to become an attorney. And the bar had very strong objections to my sharing a room in contravention of the Group Areas Act when Tumanokwe became the first advocate. So that I want to take advantage of my age. I'm about to be 90. And I don't want to keep quiet about people should be respected for their humanity and not their gender or the color of the skin or their religious belief. And I believe that we are achieving it because despite the story that I told you about the law faculty, I attended Everett's graduation ceremony a couple of weeks ago. The majority of the graduates were black, and of that majority, the majority were women. We are not fully there, but I would urge everyone, as I think most of the speakers, if I have interpreted them correctly, have said that we soon to be there. Thank you very much for listening to me, and I apologize for the length of my speech.
Thank you, Advocate Bezos. Obviously, it's un-African to interrupt your elders. We love your stories. And to the young people in the room, Advocate Bezos has role modeled how to voice your thoughts. Are there young people who want to put up their hands? Then I'll come back to those of us. Yeah, geez, there's a whole bunch of you. So I'm going to give whoever's got the mic to have the burden of deciding who should speak first.
My name is Tato Chaka. I'm from Nova Pioneer. Thank you. I'll just break the ice for my fellow students and the young people who are here. As a young individual, who is exposed to this new society. It's the first 21st century, things are different and all of that. But if we go deeper into it and see the different types of experiences that we as young people come across. And in terms of that, I would want to talk about how people with different races as friends, you know, we have white friends, black friends, Indian friends, and all of that, and how we are brought up at home differently. And we often say that white people don't have morals. That's what our parents say. Because, no, this is not an offense, but if you had to, you guys are discouraging me.
Keep going.
Anyway, if you often go to the mall on Fridays and Saturdays, you know, as black people, well, as a black child, you don't often get the chance to go out because, firstly, your parents say you can't, it's not safe, and all of that. And my cousin, who's 23 this year, she would say to me, you know, when I was young, I always wanted to go out with my friends. I grew up in Cape Town, always wanted to go out and all of that. And she'd often complain to her mother and say, how come my friend Tiana can go out every single weekend and I can't? And her mother often said to her, you know what, you're young. 2, I'm not Tiana's mother. I'm your mother. Tiana's mother will allow her to go out whenever she wants. She'll do whatever she wants to do, but she is not your mother, and you are not Tiana. And in terms of that, I feel that I've learned that as people, when we are brought up at home, and the way we are brought up at home, it kind of also adds to this racism thing. Because you'd often say to a person that if I'm a black child and my mom says I can't go out, and my white friend says, well, I'm going out, too bad for you, I would say, you know what? Your parents don't have morals. But you can't say that. You can't say that. But now if we as young people who are the following, who are like the future and all of that, if this is how we are living, and this is what our parents are telling us, that white people don't have morals, what's going to happen in the future? What's going to happen? What's going to happen to us being all equal and having Ubuntu? It's not going to happen at all. Thank you.
Okay, can we? Yes.
Yeah. So sorry, I've got the means of production.
But you have land.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, you know, I wanted to challenge the panel probably as a whole, in that, I mean, we talk about, there's the assumption that the responsibility for our transformation lay with the state. All of them seem to suggest the state. And there's very little criticism of the bosses or capital or capitalism or whatever you want to call it, that was instrumental in the shaping and the making of apartheid, especially mining capital in the areas that we work in. Now, I don't know, Vern, is it partly because some of our foundations are well supported by big corporations today, right? But I really think that part of the critique in our society is very weak. So the whole strategy of how we oppose racism, right? I mean, we work with mining communities, and I would take a very different, I'll use a similar facts to Stembile, but look at the mining sector. How the bosses consciously divided workers who wanted to be together. They made white workers underground supervisors to determine whether a workplace is unsafe or not, right? You know, so quite clearly, it was conscious interventions why people were pushed off the land, why Milner and others took the positions that they did. The second issue that I think we didn't talk about in terms of strategies and countering it is that, let's say this, we mentioned the four-nation theory. We were 80s generation. The ANC was contested by Black consciousness movement and the unity movement around very concepts of that. We had a Congress of Democrats, and Joburg was JODAC. You had Indian Congress, you had African National Congress, and Colored People's Congress, or what the variation was in the 80s, I can't say. But you know, so you had that, but there was opposition to it in the 1980s. And I agree with you guys regarding non-racism. I mean, the way SACOS, for example, the Council of Sport used non-racism, was very much in an anti-racist way, you know? So clearly some part of these concepts will not necessarily be there. My second and last major point of criticism is that we don't talk about violence in the making of apartheid, and what we counterposed was non-racism and non-violence, as much as I support it. But around the non-violence strategy, you had mass organizations, which we don't talk about. They were more democratic than they are now, but we had mass trade unions with a very particular form of democracy, which we can talk about some other time. But the violence that colonialism imposed is what helped to keep the rule. Lobengula, there was a negotiation with Rhodes, and our students only seem to critique Rhodes up to the border, I think, right? When he tried to get the mines in Zimbabwe, they signed these kind of deals, and by hook or by crook, and he was aware that they're trying to crook him, and then they used violence to take the land away. And how do we change a system that has been imposed by violence is something that we should talk about.
Thank you. Just pass the mics down, please, to Glenda.
Hi, it's Glenda Daniels. I'm not sure who my question should go to, but it is about Nelson Mandela and what I experienced at WITS as a lecturer. It's almost as though, and I don't know where this problem started and how suddenly we are woke. Woke, you know what woke means. Whereas we were asleep for 23 years. So now we woke to the fact that there's racism. Okay, I'm being a bit facetious here, but you know what I mean, right? And it's almost as though at Wits, for instance, at debates like the seminars, Keishla was Black Student Society when I was there in the 80s. You can't say Nelson Mandela and you can't talk about the Constitution. It concerns me, it hurts me deeply, and I wonder where we go. I mean, I will continue to say what I want to say. If I want to say Nelson Mandela was fantastic, I'll say so. And I'm not going to be concerned about the radical woke who say, don't you dare. So I just want to ask you guys this question. Did something happen? Did we do something wrong? Is it not, maybe the elephant in the room is the ANC that didn't do anything for poor black people? Is there something we're not discussing here when we keep talking about racism and the non-racist struggle? What exactly, so yeah, I just want to know your opinion on that.
Okay, let me give my panelists a chance to engage, and then I'm going to come for a second round, and then we'll do a time check and just also see how your energy levels are. I'm going to give you about a minute or so. Don't feel obliged to respond to everything. Like I said, you're not gurus, we're in conversation. So just respond to whatever triggered the most important thoughts for you. Who'd like to go first?
Okay, I'll start. I fully agree about the point of that we don't engage the racism perpetuated by corporations, and that we often, and I think part of the reason why we look to the state to transform our society is that, and I say this as a black woman, is that otherwise you feel completely powerless about doing anything, because the place where I feel that I've got impact is over the ANC leadership or the government or university leadership, is in state institutions, as Keishla had said before, that is where we do have the state power. But that being said, I think that we have allowed in the last 23 years, because of not focusing on it and really not interrogating it, is that we've allowed corporations to get away with a lot, and that Milner quote that I was quoting was in the context of shaping South African mining, and was in the context of working with what was it, Werner Beit, the corner house, was what they were colloquially called, and others, to really entrench a racialized state and a racial society for the purposes of capital. And there's very little of that has changed. And not just in mining, but many of my friends who we sort of were raised through this rainbow nation of the schools that we went to and university. And the second that people really confront yourself as a black person is once you enter corporate, when you're working at Investec or Nedbank or Anglo-American. And then you suddenly realize that you're not this precocious, bright, A student from UCT. You're a black woman first and foremost. And in the hierarchy of that organization, you're at the very bottom. And I think that we've seen, and this was going to be a comment to Keishla about the lack of organization. I think the students are exactly following in that tradition of a black educated class organizing. The Fees Must Fall movement, the Roads Must Fall movement are exactly a continuation of what we saw in the 70s, what we saw in the 19th century in South Africa as well. And one of the things that students have organized around is the exploitation of labor by capital, by the cleaning companies, and then with the support of universities. And so I think that, yes, it is an area, it is something that we don't talk about enough, and I don't know, I've got some ideas about why we don't, but I take the criticism about us not addressing it directly on this panel. And then finally, I think that that big question about how do you address the violence that made apartheid and colonial society, how do you unmake that non-violently, is, I mean, that's the million-dollar question, right? And I think that there's ways of thinking about violence, that yes, there was a great deal of physical and brutality in colonialism, but there was also kind of existential violence to who you think of yourself as, that we haven't really dealt with as a society. And I don't know whether you can undo that violence with other violence, or, and if you're going to, and so we hold on to this principle of nonviolence and undoing the systems that we have inherited. But what we all know, and I think that we're living in a period now of a great deal of violence and resistance to that. And I think that that is something that will perpetually, that we will perpetually come against. Yeah.
Vern, you have to answer the question that Glenda has posed, I would imagine. I mean, the question of Madiba's legacy is fascinating to me. If anyone bothers to read, which I would recommend you do, some of the position papers that come out of the Nelson Mandela Foundation, you would be shocked. If you are in love only with Mandela, the reconciler, you won't recognize the position paper that speaks to other parts of his legacy that are not comfortable for those people who only want to remember a certain kind of Madiba. I mean, some of the stuff that Vern and Sello have been writing and punting and facilitating is as woke as it gets. Mm-hmm. Vern, was Madiba woke?
Let me start with a statement about capital. The engine of white hegemony in South Africa today is the private sector. However, we're all complicit. Nelson Mandela Foundation receives lots of corporate money. But let's talk about the mining sector. Let's talk about what's happening on the platinum belt. There we see a deadly alliance between capital, traditional leadership, and the state. And what happens is that poor people, the underclasses, suffer. We have cases in the Platinum Belt where people who were forcibly removed in the 70s are now being forcibly removed again by their traditional leaders. I don't think that our biggest challenge in South Africa is state capture. I think democracy has been captured, and that's a global phenomenon. But to pick up on the Madiba question, he was somewhat woke. I think that when you listen to young people who say that he sold out, there is an element of his paying the price of having been elevated during the struggle years. There was a whole generation of leadership. He was part of a collective, and yet, but he was strategically elevated as a symbol of struggle. And so today, he becomes the symbol of the terrible compromises that were made and the dreadful mistakes that were made in the 1990s.
Is that a grammatical pause, or are you done dropping the mic? Okay. Christy?
Okay, thanks for those interesting questions and comments. I think maybe to start with Advocate Bezos, who I think as a country we owe you a great debt. And what was interesting, one of the interesting things about what you were talking about is it shows you actually how race actually works as a social construction. Part of my background is in critical whiteness studies, and you can see how whiteness is actually shifts all the time. You know, so this idea of Greek refugees in the Second World War arriving in South Africa, who are then referred to in Afrikaans as vuilgoed. You know, vuilgoed basically meaning I think it's almost untranslatable, but it's sort of like trash or something that's discardable. And the idea with that is because of this hierarchy that you find in whiteness. You know, whiteness is, the boundary shifts all the time. And if you look at the United States in the late 19th century, early 20th century, for example, people who arrived there from Italy, I would say Greeks as well, Jewish people, and so on, were not regarded as white. You know, Jewish people actually, and we know, of course, that kind of thinking where it culminated in the Holocaust during the Second World War, and the incredible loss of life there, which was, and it comes from that kind of race thinking from the 19th century onwards, and so on. So so this idea of whiteness as something that needs to be accomplished, and it's not something that automatically accrues to you because you've got a pinkish, blottish skin like me. With Afrikaners, for example, that's partly. I would argue what also gave us apartheid. You had these two competing settler classes, and the one settler class actually felt itself to be of a lesser whiteness. And in fact, if you look at the discourses of people like Milner, people like Rhodes, Kitchener, and all those British imperialists, they positioned Afrikaners as lesser whites. And in fact, they would even say things like Afrikaners were basically savages with a thin white veneer, etc., etc. And that partly then led to this whole idea of Afrikaners wanting to in a sense prove themselves to, you know, as white, and gave us the system of apartheid, which were then used to elevate Afrikaans white people. So it shows you race shifts all the time. The category in terms of who's allowed in, who's kicked out, and so forth. All of that, and it shows you actually how it responds to power relations within in a very specific given moment. You know. Looking at just so it links actually also nicely to your quotation from Milner, where he speaks about how they don't want a white proletariat, you know, and that also speaks to that convergence of class and race, in the sense that the British actually took their ideas about class that they were perpetuating and perpetrating in their own country when they were colonizing the rest of the world. They took those ideas about class into the colonies, and they actually translated it into race. So you see quite a strong convergence between the way that they think of how the British thought of race with how they actually thought about class back at home. I thought Glenda asked a very important question. I mean, as an academic, I found myself also confronted with this. And it would seem as though, I mean, there's basically a discourse of anti-constitutionalism that's been running the last few years. To my mind, and I think we also had a comment from the back referring to the current situation as neo-apartheid. So I would actually urge us all to really go and study the 1990s, go and study what happened during the negotiation process. Yes, compromises were made, but we have to take into account that this is the most violent period of apartheid. More people died between 1990 and 1994 than at any other time during apartheid. It was a period of high political contestation, and the National Party definitely did not, at the end of the day, get what they wanted. And they wanted a white veto. They wanted almost like a white House of Parliament that would be able to veto a second House of Parliament where you would have representation based on the democratic vote. So that's what the National Party was wanting. At that time, also we have to remember incredible state violence, overt state violence, but also covert state violence, and so forth. We also, and then of course, Capital was positioning itself, and Capital was using its position to try and massage certain ANC leaders, into a more compliant kind of position, and that's what also happened with people like Trevor Manuel and so forth. But the fact of the matter is, I think we have to distinguish very, very clearly also between the Constitution, which is not only a liberal democratic document to those who might be under that illusion. It's actually quite an unusual constitution in the sense that it also contains socioeconomic rights. The property clause is usually mentioned. The constitution doesn't say you have a right to land. You know, it's not like a human right to own land. And the constitution actually allows the expropriation of land in the public interest. So we actually have to ask ourselves, why has our government actually not used the power that's actually vested in the constitution to do that? We've got an expropriation bill, from what I understand now, that's on its way. Why was this not done 20 years ago? You can, in the public interest, using the constitution as it stands now, you can expropriate land without compensation. So that's something that we need to remind ourselves with. And I also then I also think that we need to distinguish between the constitution and the macroeconomic policy that was adopted at that time. The constitution doesn't say which macroeconomic policy should be adopted. The macroeconomic policy that was adopted at the time, and this started not actually with Gear, it actually started already with the RDP. Kusato's original idea with the RDP was a kind of a Keynesian capitalist document with a strong social welfarist dimension. That was then, in a sense, corrupted, you know, in the processes through which it went with the ANC. So if you look at the RDP white paper, it already contains some of the ideas that you find in Gear, which basically opens this door to neoliberal capitalism, which is about deregulation, privatization, etc., etc. So we need to go and look at those processes, look at those documents close by, and distinguish between these different kinds of spheres, one could say, you know. And our biggest problem, and I think that's what's also led to this anti-constitutionalism, is ultimately a macroeconomic policy where everywhere in the world where it is applied, it increases socioeconomic inequality. Neoliberal capitalism only has one effect. It's got an increase in socioeconomic inequality. You can see it globally, and you can also see it within countries, and we are no different in that sense. So we have to challenge ourselves in terms of why can't we actually produce a macroeconomic policy that speaks directly to the realities in our country, and start to radically redistribute wealth as should have been done 20 years ago already.
What I think we should not underestimate is the power of the people who are organized. We, in the past and historically, were able to make the most strides when we were well organized. And there's nothing in what I can see in the future that would change that simple fact, that the major strides for transformation will happen when people are organized. It's not just state control that is going to bring us a better life. It is people organized. I don't think we should look to the state only. Yes, as part of a range of issues we should be doing, we should look at them, but we should look at ourselves and organize ourselves for the transformation we are looking for. I can remember a discussion in about '89 at VETS, serious discussion, where people were saying, this idea of freedom in my lifetime is just, people in the 40s were saying the same thing. And Lusaka is strewn, as well as South Africa, is strewn with graves of people who said freedom in my lifetime. Now, I was on the side of the argument that said, folks, this thing of freedom is not coming anytime soon. And at that stage, I think the missing element was to take into consideration the power of the people organized. And I think that's the element that's missing now. I understand the structural nature of economic inequalities. The structure of political exclusion and inequalities was just as structurally constructed as the economic inequalities now. But guess what? We were able to overcome that. I'm utterly convinced that with organization, it's as simple as that, and organized people. And I'm not talking about just organization among sections of the people. I'm talking about deep-seated and widespread organization. The society can be transformed in as short a time as possible. And if anything has happened in the last quarter of the century, I think it is the mistake that was made in 1994 of dissolving organizations of people in favor of the ANC. Now, I'm part of the ANC. I was part of the conversation on the island that led to these negotiations. I'm keen to understand people who are saying that Mandela was wrong. I'm not privy to those discussions. I'm keen to understand that so that I can give you that part of the discussion to which I am privy. I don't think there were assumptions that were wrong prior to 1994, leading into 1994 within the ANC. A whole host of things happened thereafter. But again, 1994 was a major, major, major breakthrough which laid a basis for us to do a whole host of things. Hey, did we do those things? No, we didn't. And why didn't we? We believed the myth that only the ANC should exist. A whole range of other organizations, the civic organizations, the women's organizations, and the youth organizations should not exist. That was a mistake. We can correct that mistake now. And I think if we do, we will be able to transform this country. We can't invest our future only in the ANC, only in the state, only in the power of black people who've made a huge amount of money. And I repeat what I said earlier on, black people now have more capital than Afrikaners had in the 40s. We have not been able to use that to the benefit of everybody. Why? Part of the reason lies in the fact that we are not organized. We still can correct that. I was part of the 80s in Soweto. I saw street committees coming into being. The power that was embedded in those institutions was awesome. We can do it now.
Okay, we've got less than, we've only got 6 minutes left, frankly, which is great. I'm a great believer in quitting while you're ahead. I'm going to give you the final say, not the panel. So I'll take 4 more contributions from the floor, and I'm being lobbied with painful expressions on people's faces. The lady right in the middle had her hand up. First time behind you. And then I'm going to come to Sandile, just because I like his smile. And then I'll come to you at the back, ma'am.
I also have a mic.
That sounds like a threat. Why don't you go first, and then pass the mic along.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so one of my questions is that when we have these talks, we have to talk about reparations. Like with Ta-Nehisi Coates' article, The Case for Reparations. And I was wondering, do you think reparations is feasible? And if so, what would that policy look like?
Okay. I'm going to ask a request that you make a statement rather than ask a question. I'm going to deprive them of an opportunity to respond to you, despite professorial and other titles. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Darlene. I'm a senior lecturer at the Wits School of Governance. I had an old maths teacher, and he used to say, where there is no vision, there the people perish. We have deracialized in this society. We've deracialized greed, and we've deracialized celebrity-style wealth as goals in our lives, especially as young people. So when we come together in this room, we all want to work against race, right? That's what unites us. We're here because we don't like race. It contains us. So let's think about our contested elder, now Madiba. And he used to say, when you get to the top of the mountain, you can't actually stay there. You can't live there. You can't live in the same place where you have ablutions and everything else. You actually need to look ahead. So if we want to look ahead and think about how do we smash through the barriers of race, we have to get outside of the categories and the thinking about race. But there's no easy Helen Ziller style, let's just forget that you're black and that nobody takes you seriously. We have to work through this to fight through this barrier. But we need to know where we're going. What are the tips of the other mountains that we're looking towards? And I would say that we need to start thinking of ourselves differently thinking of ourselves in relation to our planet Earth, thinking of ourselves in relation to the universe, and thinking about how we, in non-racial constellations of people who want to work against race, can find those moments and those spaces where we begin to work against white capital, but also against the new black capital. So there's a moment of deracialization that we require. Smash through white capital, but it's not only about old mining capital. It's about new mining capital, and the individuals that you know are contesting to be presidents and leadership of this country, and they are deeply implicated in mining capital, but new mining capital. There was a Pondoland rebellion recently, a new Pondoland rebellion, and there was a beautiful young woman who said no to the Australian miners. You can't have what's under the soil, this titanium. We find this place so beautiful. We want our indigenous environmentalism, and don't tell us what wealth is. We have such wealth in our indigenous roots. Fight through these barriers of racism, find the new mountain edges, think about the new mountain ranges, but think about that in terms of our relationship with the planet, and that way we can all work together, constellations of non-racial groups against race. Thank you.
Now just pass the mic along too. What a beautiful soliloquy, eh? Didn't you love this subtweet in the middle of it? Give that woman a McDonald's burger or 3.
Good afternoon, everybody, and I won't be long. Just 2 or 3 or 4 thoughts. We'd like to thank the panel. I really enjoyed it. Now, I'm speaking as a white person, and I'm sure in many of your minds you think, oh gosh, what's she going to say as a white person? And I think it's normal to think that way. I would just like to say that I think many white people feel not to speak out, even in a meeting like this, where it's a friendly meeting, because everything being said by a white person is often taken in a negative sense. So you can't have an honest discussion. You know, I think I've got some credentials from I was small, I grew up, and all the things you've mentioned. Also, many white people suffered. We were rejected by our community, by our families and all of that, but that's not the case at the moment, just to say. So what I stand for is justice, what's right and what's wrong. Now, I work in the medical field, and my question or my statement at the moment is a practical one. I work in the medical field in a hospital, and often mistakes are being made. And they're made because of negligence, regardless who makes them. But unfortunately, if the problem's being addressed, almost always, not always, but almost always, it's put down, oh, you're a white person and you just like to criticize. I deal with people's lives. People die if mistakes are made. If I can't address it, what do I do? It might be one of you, it might be one of your children, it might be one of your relatives. So just think about that.
Thank you. Okay, just get the mic to the back there, to that gentleman with his hands up. This is going to be the final comment. I ask you to just please sit tight, and then we'll pull it all together in the next minute.
Sanbodan. Should I use both? Thank you so much for a very fascinating conversation. I think there's so much to unpack. Unfortunately, there's no time. We should have been here at 7 a.m. Until the afternoon. My biggest concern is that you will not be able to change the future without knowing the history. And the biggest problem we've done in this country is not to teach our children history. And I'm glad there's someone who's an archivist, because the transcripts of the CODESA negotiations, I do not think they are in public. Why are they not public? That's one question. I ask this question because I have 2 boys. They used to go to school until I took them out of school. One of them comes home, he says, we have a Mandela assignment. So I said, okay, let's sit down. Let's talk about what does Mandela represent. No, teachers said because it's Mandela Day, let's draw something nice and flowers about Mandela. It's predominantly white teachers, right, in the school. Do you know anything about Mandela? Yeah, he was a hero, you know, in a very sort of brush it away kind of situation. So I sit down with him and his mother, well, stepmother in this case, who's a white woman. We unpack the whole story of why Mandela is important, because, you know, schools don't go that deep. And then my older son says, why can't you just get over it? That's the problematic thing about us trying to change society where we have not looked at history. One of the most successful societies, although they, in terms of dealing with their evils, is Germany. So you talk to German kids tell you, it's so irritating, we have to deal with the Holocaust all the time. We are taught that in school. Because an obsession of brown people of taking their kids to white schools, they do not learn that history. They do not learn the history of apartheid, of colonialism, and what it means in the society today. So many of these kids don't understand this fascination that we have about changing the society to an anti-racial society. But we are talking about the problematic black middle class, but that problematic black middle class is going to increase as these kids grow and they become older and they do not know what to deal with. So I think from a primary education to universities, the only first time I learned about African, I used to be a student of politics. I learned Leviathan, Karl Marx, Engels. Until I went on exchange program in Tanzania, it's the only time I learned about Chama cha Mapinduzi and the party politics in Africa. And at that time, I knew that ANC will be like Chama cha Mapinduzi. If we were taught that, we would have known that the ANC will turn out to become like any other revolutionary party in Africa, in terms of becoming greedy and not being able to do what they were supposed to do. So I think the academia, schooling, is our biggest problem. I mean, we could sit here as adults. Our time is passing. But these are guys should have this conversation. But where do they start? They don't have no base because we have not taught them, we have not given them that base. I think that's, yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I'm not going to try and summate today's conversation, not least because I need what Americans call a biology break, also known as going to the bathroom desperately. But because I think there is a necessary and irreducible complexity about these conversations. In terms of feelings, which is all the rage these days, I feel two things about this conversation, and they pull in different directions. On the one hand, there is, of course, the obvious dissatisfactions, because whether you say it to yourself or not, when you come to a public debate in a town hall format, you hope to walk away with answers, with a sense of catharsis, right? And I certainly don't feel that. On the other hand, I do have a sort of smirk on my face, in my head, because there's a certain satisfaction in hearing South Africans puzzling through these issues. And that's not enough. Puzzling through these issues is not the right response to Thabo in Brits, who calls onto my open line this morning and says, Eusebius, I'm not free, I'm unemployed, I've knocked at so many doors, I don't know what this Freedom Day celebration is about. In front of me is a wheelbarrow, I'm about to go and find some water, and that's water that someone in my family has to pay for. So it has to be a jarring conversation, because racism is jarring. And as long as we don't live in a just society, you're not entitled to feel cathartic after an afternoon out at the Apartheid Museum. So I hope that if you are as emotionally unsettled a little bit, or not sufficiently satisfied by the dialogue, that you will sit with that and reflect on it. I really do think it is appropriate, because the other tendency, which I think Professor Christie van der Westhuizen was right about, is this bourgeois monopoly on public discourse, that we come here and we walk away and we have warm and fuzzy feelings, but of course the truth is the country is still as broken as it was when we started this dialogue. So I want to firstly thank our panelists, if we can put our hands together, for their contribution. And on a more self-congratulatory note, can you also give yourselves a round of applause? And last but not least, the Apartheid Museum, in particular Wadi, who's conceived of this series of dialogues. It's come on very nicely over the last year or so. It keeps getting better and better, and as well as our new partnership with the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation, which I hope will continue. Thank you so much. Okay, the final word, Wady. I'm going to ask you just to come and thank us and whatever is, available outside.
So thanks very much, Eusebius. Thank you again for being here. Thank you to our panelists. We really appreciate it. It was insightful, and we hope to have a lot more of these dialogues where we perhaps can go a little bit further in and feel maybe just a little bit of catharsis after the event. So thank you very much, everybody, for coming. We have a few snacks outside, very little, but something to chew on and a drink. Please join us for that. And if you wish to be receiving information about future events, make sure your name is written down on the little pamphlets outside. Otherwise, leave your business card and you can be sure you'll be receiving invitations. Thank you very much. And thank you, Mum Sophie's here today. Mum Sophie de Bruin is here. We are thrilled. Thank you very much for coming as well.
Como le fedile, upelele.